leaving.
She's gonna quietly slip away. First chance I get. Don't you think it's best for all of us?
I think it is.
If I hadn't done what I did, you'd be dead now.
I chose to stay.
You chose suicide.
I'm coming with you.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
All I care about is getting out of here. As far away as I can. Like you. What's next?
The group is split. We got a plan for this.
People are gonna start panicking.
It's a waste of time, all this hoping and praying.
Just right. Let's go, you and me. Let's go before they get back. It's not gonna end here like this. We can't give up. Maybe we should just go back.
Hello everyone and welcome once again to another episode of Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone and today we have part 2 of our New York Comic Con special. We're going to be continuing talking about some of the things we saw at New York Comic Con this past October. Specifically this time around, we're going to hit The Walking Dead. And not only are we going to talk a little bit about the panel that we got to see, which Mike Sutton, one of our contributors, will be talking about. And we'll also sit down with Steve and talk about a couple of the first episodes of this season's The Walking Dead. So let's start off with Mike Sutton at New York Comic Con.
The Walking Dead panel, which, God, there's not much to say about that. I mean,
We both,
you were there.
Yeah, we both did. We
you
were
were there
for
for that.
And once again, we got there by the skin of our teeth. Like
Yeah.
last year, we made it because they cut the line right in front of us, and then they let us in.
We got lucky. And that was going an hour and a half before it started.
That's right. We got
And
online
we
pretty early.
Just made it. Again,
Once again, they had the usual suspects of guests,
Yep.
a couple of producers, a couple of the makers, and the actors, a couple of different ones from last year. But unfortunately, absent from the group was Frank Darabont, which he is no longer involved in the show, which that was one of the most surprising things about the panel was that nobody brought that up. Not only did the producers or cast, but the people asking questions. I'm like, it's the elephant in the room, you know? It's like, dude, what happened to Frank?
I was surprised at that, too, that, when it came to the question and answering, that nobody stood up and said, what happened to Frank Darabont? I heard he left the show.
He was asked to leave or he left or something happened.
Don't know the details, but let's wait and see. Hopefully they keep it up. And knowing that clip that we saw.
Oh, that was a cool clip. And as a matter of fact,
cool.
we'll be seeing that clip tonight, I believe.
Yes.
Because it's part of the first episode. Now, from what I understand, and I hope this is true, when Frank Darabont left the show, they had already written practically the entire season. And as of yesterday, they were saying that they were shooting like the last 2 or 3 episodes. So they're pretty much done with the show, at least for the season. And hopefully, whatever happens in terms of not being able to participate, we won't feel that this season. You might see that next season.
Yeah, that's the impression I had too. Was they're pretty much done. They're still filming. They said they're halfway through. It was only 13 episodes.
Well, it's a cable show, so they, instead of the 22 network shows, they do 13. But this year they're splitting them because it's the first time they have a full season. And I believe half of them we're going to get now, and then they go away at the end of November, and then back in February they're back with the second half of the season.
Yeah. And again, just the zombies look great. I mean, I hate to say it, but you look at them on the big screen, and it was really cool to see it on the big screen instead of your TV.
That's one of the things they mentioned. The host of the panel was Chris Hardwick, and he mentioned that he got to see the premiere episode, and they saw it in a movie theater, and it's film quality material they're seeing. It'd be great to be able to see these in the movie theater every week. Obviously, I don't want to pay $10 to see them, but I would love to do that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And even a side note, I started watching Walking Dead Season 1 on Blu-ray last week. I didn't finish it yet. Ran out of time, but...
Well, are you familiar with the comic?
Oh, yes, I am.
So you will notice whatever differences exist between the two more than I would because I've never read the comic. I bought them, but I'm purposely not reading them because I don't want to spoil myself.
You have to read it because even Kirkman said yesterday, Season 2, Dwayne...
Some characters who die in the comic don't die now right away.
He hasn't died yet. He was supposedly killed off in the first year or so, yet he's still there.
Yeah, I might venture into starting it now.
He's changing things around, and now he's doing the farm. We get to introduce with Maggie this season, so that'll be kind of neat. That's Glenn's love interest down the road.
So that's the new actress they introduced at the panel?
Yes.
Okay.
So that'll be cool because, again, down the road, you're going to get where Maggie and him, they start falling in love, and it talks more about their relationships.
All the
It's
character
a character
development.
development. Yes, the zombies are there, but it's not always about the zombies. It's really the people. And that's what really makes
Right.
his book so great. It's not just the gore fest.
Now, the other thing is that because the comic book continues, I mean, he's not done with this thing. You
Not by a
have
long
enough
shot.
material. As long as people watch it, it's an endless well. It just keeps going.
He has so many things to do that we haven't even seen yet. And he mentioned people asked, are we ever going to see Michonne?
Yeah,
And
people are throwing around these names. They're talking about certain things, and I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't want to know what they're talking about.
And no, spoiler alert, for anybody who hasn't watched it, Michonne was a character that he introduced. She was an African-American lady.
Carries a samurai
She
sword or
carries
something?
a samurai sword. She survived on her own, only with a sword. So when she goes to kill the zombies,
So who do you think
that's what she uses. She doesn't use a gun.
who do you think would play her in the show if they go for a known name? They could always go for an unknown, which is probably what they'll do. But I imagine if she's like a badass type of character, I'm imagining like a Pam Grier type of individual, not a clean, pristine, but more like a rough and rugged
Right.
actress.
You need somebody rough and rugged. Yeah, you can't have a pretty girl.
Right.
You can, but she's got to be tough
Yeah.
because that's the whole point of Michonne is, she survives on her own, only with a samurai sword, and then she joins the group.
Right.
And at one point, again, spoiler alert, if anybody hasn't read the comics,
All right, I'm covering my ears.
she gets to the point where she does want to stop and put the sword away, thinking that she can finally live a regular life and she'd be okay. And she has to take the sword out again and start killing zombies. So, but can't wait for The Walking Dead.
Well, I'll tell you the thing we just mentioned about what kind of an actress could play that character is the fact that even for the lead characters, they didn't 90210 this show. These are, they're attractive characters, but they're rugged. They look good in their parts. They don't look like pretty boys or models, who are acting on the side. These are nice, good actors that can carry their weight.
Yeah, the 90210 characters would have died in the
We'll
first
save those for the
outbreak.
WB. You put them on the WB shows.
Right.
This is something different.
When WB wants to put a zombie program out there,
Can you imagine what that would
they'll be tweeting, "Oh my God, there's a zombie
Oh my
behind
God,
me.
what am I going to do?
What do I do?"
Quick, boot up your computer.
Yeah, and they'll probably have the hot zombie too. Oh, look, he's hot. Let's keep him around. Yeah, I don't think so. That's not what Kirkman
But this
does.
was a great panel. Like Michael said, they showed a clip. I wish they would have shown more. I want to see a lot more. But unfortunately, that's all we have. The good
You
thing
only
is that,
have
like I
to
said,
wait 6 hours.
I know
man,
in 6
dude.
hours, more or less, we'll be at home,
7.
ready to watch him. All the kiddies will be in bed.
7 hours we got to watch it.
But Kyle actually got to see the clip. My son Kyle, he was really into it, and it's like, oh my God, what do we do? He's too young, but it's such a good show.
All right, well, that was Mike and myself talking about the Walking Dead panel. Let's now switch gears and listen to a conversation between Steve and myself talking about our reaction to the first couple of episodes of The Walking Dead for Season 2. All right, Steve, so tell me about your impressions of the first 2 episodes we've seen so far of The Walking Dead.
I felt that the season premiere episode was a bit disjointed. I subsequently found out why it felt disjointed. The opening to me just seemed like it didn't belong not only attached to the episode, but within the context of The Walking Dead. The dialogue, the delivery, it just felt like it didn't belong. It felt very forced, and it didn't feel natural to me. So it kind of took me off guard because I had been waiting months for this thing to start again, and much anticipation had been building. I was a little disappointed, but then it kind of found its mojo, and I forget who I was talking to after watching it was critiquing the fact that, all right, we're in a situation, everybody's arguing again, and we have, it seems as if every time the characters get together, they're breaking off again. But that doesn't bother me as much because, again, I'm in it for the long haul. I understand that we're going to have these story arcs, and as long as they resolve each arc in a decent way, I'm fine with that. It doesn't really bother me. There are certain characters that I don't particularly care for over some of the other characters. As anybody would, you would hone in on one storyline or a couple of storylines. But I know that the ensemble that's the point. That's how the whole thing works. But I thought that once the initial season premiere settled down, They really got into it. And what I did appreciate is the fact that no one was turned into a zombie on the entire episode, because that's a trap that you can easily get into where, okay, so they have a limited number of cast members. They're either going to have to add new people or they're just going to whittle it down to a handful. And again, I'm not really familiar with the graphic novel, the comic. I haven't read any of that. I do plan on reading that at some point, but I just want to get into it a bit more so that way the surprises are fresh in this medium for me, and then I can go back and, kind of make the correlation between the two. So, once it did settle in, I thought it was great. And the fact that I really didn't see the ending coming, that Carl was going to get shot, and the fact that, again, he was shot. He wasn't bitten by a zombie. It wasn't some attached to the main storyline. And again, that's something else that I appreciate because, as George Romero has said, the zombies are really not relevant in relation to the overall story that's trying to be told. They merely create a setting for us to examine ourselves inward, because it's, in most of the zombie films, it's how the humans interact with each other that determines the course of the storyline. And that's where all the allegories are made, and you really see those archetypes pop through. Who is the leader? Who is the conflicted leader? Who is the, the stereotypical villain? So, I'm a zombie fan. I appreciate it, and I know that comes with the territory. So I'm always interested to see how people are going to deal with that in a new way. But I still love the gore and all the effects, too.
Well, even though Romero is not linked to the show at all, they are trying to follow those basic principles of it's not about the zombies. It's about how people react to each other. And I know this is what they're doing with the show. I've heard him say that. And yeah, you are having those, the biggest conflicts they're having is with each other. They understand how the zombie rules are, but the biggest problems are with each other.
What's also interesting is that they've decided to have the faster paced zombies as opposed to the typical lurking, slow-moving zombies. So not that they're running full tilt like a 28 Days,
right,
but they definitely are moving with more purpose as opposed to just this, very slow, meandering approach.
Yeah, I think I heard in an interview Kirkman said something about that the 28 Day Later zombies, they're not even zombies. They're infected. Rage.
Right.
It's not a zombified rule. This is completely different. One of the reasons why I think the disjointedness that you might have seen, and it is there when you really look at it, has to do with the fact that the first episode was really supposed to be 2 episodes from what I understand. Something happened which links back to the whole issue with Frank Darabont leaving the show, where apparently they looked at the footage coming from the first episode, which was directed by a director picked by Darabont, and AMC wasn't too pleased with the results. Therefore, apparently what they did is they took the first 15 minutes of the show that we've seen, that whole road part of the show, the whole opening of the show, and they combined it with episode number 2 into one episode. If you look at the credits in the beginning of the episode, you'll see that it has 2 directors.
Right.
One director was Ernest Dickerson, I think, a pretty well-known director. I think he's Spike Lee's DP.
He was Spike Lee's DP, yeah. And I think the first film he directed was a film called Juice.
Okay.
With Omar Epps and Tupac Shakur.
Wow. But his name pops up on television all the time.
Yes.
He's a big television director.
Yes.
And then there was another director listed. I forget the person's name. However, I believe if you research that name, that's a pseudonym for Frank Darabont.
Right. I believe it's an anagram. So if you look at all the letters it's a female name. If you break them apart and put them back together again, it says Frank Darabont or something along those lines.
And it's weird because it's just bizarre because it had something to do with the fact that, and again, this is all not speculation, this is rumors, and I mean, I'm sure AMC or anybody associated with the show has not confirmed this story. This is stuff I'm reading, at a website like Ain't It Cool and stuff like that, but they're saying that whatever it is that they were unhappy with, not only did that director never put his name on the show, Darabont ended up putting not even his own name, he put a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And that apparently, for one reason or another, led to his dismissal from the show. Now, we don't have the whole story. We don't know what his deal was. I don't know if he was a difficult person to work with or what the hell is. But the announcement of him getting let go happened right after San Diego Comic-Con. As a matter of fact, he showed up at San Diego Comic-Con representing the show. He got fired apparently 3 or 4 days later. The other thing is that apparently sometime, I think over the summer, there was word came out that as soon as the first season was over, Darabont had fired all the writers for the first season.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, something was not right. You know, typically if something like that were to happen where you fire your entire writing staff, you take on the role of the lead writer, and then you just, I believe he said he was going to freelance people, just bring them in and out as needed, kind of indicates that there's some control issues there.
Right. And it's pretty odd because, in other words, the show was critically acclaimed. The viewers liked it. We loved it. And then they made that announcement, and it seemed kind of weird because it's kind of like, well, usually you don't hear about a whole writing staff getting fired unless there's a problem, some legitimate problems, or the quality of the show is not good or something. But no, this is good quality, so logic would say keep it the way it is.
Sure.
But another one of these statements that kind of surfaced was that the announcement that he fired the entire staff might have been a little overblown. I'm hearing now that he fired maybe 1 or 2 writers. So it wasn't like he let go 20 people. Now, granted, yes, maybe he wanted more control. Maybe he wanted to do more of the decision-making. And I also know that because it's AMC, their big cash cow is Mad Men. And they recently re-signed everybody to continue doing more seasons of Mad Men. And they gave them, from what I understand, an incredible amount of money.
Yeah.
As a result of that, their other shows had to scale back their budgets. So that might have been the big thing about why Darabont might no longer be here. Less money for the show, not only less money for the individual participants, but just, having your budget shrink when your show is a very successful and acclaimed show. Some people might not like that, and it might be part of the reason why he decided to walk. We don't know for sure because nobody's really talking publicly yet.
We need a mole. We need a mole to come out.
Not only did the Madman budget situation affect shows like The Walking Dead, but it also, I believe, affected Breaking Bad, another AMC show that had to make some adjustments, especially now that they're going into their final season. They had to make some adjustments in their budgets, I believe, because of that, because of the fact that Mad Men is getting so much attention and so much of the financing is being focused more on that show. Obviously, Breaking Bad is finishing, so financially nobody cares. They're not going to invest more money in a show that's going to end. Even though the show is incredibly critically acclaimed, it has all kinds of Emmy Awards. Bryan Cranston's won a couple of them. Even the second lead, I forget his name, he just won one too. The Walking Dead, maybe they're figuring, yes, it's very popular now, but how long can they sustain a show like that?
Right.
How long can you continue with that? And Mad Men, on the other hand, I guess that's where they're putting their money. They're saying they're banking on that being a more successful long-term kind of show, even though this is, I think we're coming up either the 4th.
Yeah, it's been on for quite a few years.
4 or 5 seasons or something. So I don't know. Again, I don't know what they're envisioning doing with Mad Men. So as a result of all this, apparently what's happened is Robert Kirkman has taken more of a leading role in the creation of the show.
Every show needs a showrunner, especially a show of this magnitude where you have so many people that you're trying to conduct to create just one episode.
Well, apparently they took their number 2 guy, I forget his name, who was already working for the show before and made him the lead showrunner. But Kirkman also took a bigger role.
Yeah.
Last year when we went to New York Comic Con, he was there, and he was, I don't want to say he was a background player, but he was not in front. You could tell that Darabont was leading that ship. It was Darabont, Gale, and Hurd. That's it. Those were the 2 big creators of the show, and Kirkman was there because it's his story.
Yeah.
He was kind of like a lead writer, let's call him. Everything is based on his ideas, even though they were saying there were certain things in the show that were going to hit that were not written by Kirkman because they're inventing some stuff to keep the show fresh.
Well, I wonder if he will be able to stray from his own storylines. That's going to be very interesting.
Right. And this time around at New York Comic Con, the panel, as far as the show creators was concerned, Galen Hurd was there. She's like the lead producer. Kirkman was really the person they were sending out there as the big name frontman, even though this new showrunner wasn't there.
Do you think that also maybe that had something to do with the fact that New York Comic Con is really more comic based? And since you have the creator of the comic there, that they would want him to kind of lead the panel?
I think it's 2 reasons. Number one, yes, it's always good to have a comic guy because this is a comic-based show. I think an even bigger reason is I don't think they wanted to have the new number 1 guy out there because he's going to be asked questions about, so, dude, how'd you get your job? Now, I'm sure the guy who was hosting running the panel, which was Chris Hardwick, I'm pretty certain they must have told him, listen, don't bring up Darabont. But nobody's controlling the audience members.
Right. I mean,
questions.
did they have screeners there?
I don't know. I don't think so. It would have been so difficult to do that. But that was one of the most shocking things about that panel was the fact that nobody mentioned Darabont.
Well, probably because they were all starstruck because it was Kirkman there, and they don't want to, piss anybody off.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I'm sure they have a canned answer.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's rehearsed in case anybody asks you about what happened. They have an answer ready. Even better yet, they should have taken the initiative and said, when Chris Hardwick was, asking his questions, he should have said, all right, before we get started, let's
give him
address
a softball, something that was prepared.
Or, let's address the 800-pound gorilla.
Right.
What happened to Darabont?
Yeah.
And they could have said something like, well, yeah, creative differences, and, he's going to do some other work, and we're going to do this work, but, we're in good hands, and, we have the writer, the guy who invented the show, we still have him, and,
Right.
So, but it was a little odd that nobody mentioned anything about it. Now, let me ask you a question, because you kind of tapped into this a little bit. We've talked a long time ago in one of our previous shows about the gore factor of some of the movies we see, specifically the kills. As far as zombie movie goes, how do you think this ranks up in terms of, are they just recycling old ones, or are they actually creating some new, exciting, scary, gory stuff?
Well, I mean, the zombies themselves are relatively standard, but for instance, the zombie autopsy was something that I hadn't seen before.
Right. It's funny because that scene for some reason reminded me of Jaws.
It did. You half expect a Louisiana license plate to come flying out of the zombie. But I thought that was very creative. I didn't see that coming, and it was pretty disgusting to boot.
With new technology now, what I see a lot of is, and again, I'm used to seeing it, I see a lot of digital CGI created blood in terms of shots. If somebody gets shot, they almost don't use squibs anymore.
No.
They don't like I guess it's too difficult, or they get a better effect out of CGI created blood explosions.
Sure.
And the other thing is that they're able to use a lot more of like the blue screen to eliminate part of somebody's body. Like, for example, the bicycle girl we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
This was, from what I understand, I think it was an amputee. The actress or the actor, I don't know if it was a guy or a girl. However, they did blue screen whatever legs that person had from the knee to let's say the thigh area. They blue screened that off. This way you have a zombie that doesn't even have legs, just the torso coming at you, because I guess you don't have a lot of, torso actors. You're limited, I guess, by what body parts people have as an actor. And that's stuff that you can get away with now. You couldn't do that in the 80s. They didn't have that technology. That's all like post-Forrest Gump
right.
technology.
One of the other things I like that they do is when they disguise themselves by throwing the dead bodies over themselves or covering themselves with zombie clothing and stuff like that.
That was a little reminiscent of the movie Platoon.
Platoon.
Where they're being overrun and the guy just covers himself with dead bodies. But then he's
exactly.
dead.
Exactly.
Now, one question that was brought up on one of the shows, the post show, which is something we were talking again earlier, they do a post Walking Dead show called Talking Dead, which is hosted by Chris Hardwick. Once again, he hosted the panel. It's a live show. They usually run it around either 11 or midnight. One of the questions they were asking is, when they were putting people on top of each other like that, isn't anybody concerned that the blood from the zombie is mixing with your own blood and you might get infected by covering yourself up in blood like that?
That's an excellent point. Or even, especially in the second episode where they're killing zombies at close range or stabbing zombies in the head, there's all kinds of blood flying, and I don't see anybody really protecting their orifices to make sure that they're not ingesting the blood.
Especially in the first season, if you remember, when they were like inside a mall or a shopping center or something, and they end up having to cover their own bodies with their zombie parts in order to walk amongst them. When they were chopping up the dead zombie, I remember they were wearing like a full faceplate, like a clear faceplate,
right.
and they were wearing like rubber suits because they didn't want to get any blood on them while they were dismembering them.
Right.
And then they cover themselves up and all that stuff. But I think one of the things they mentioned on that after show, the Talking Dead, is that they will address at some point what is the specific infection rules or capacities of, is it blood? Is it saliva? Is, how much of an infection are you dealing with, Because, a lot of times you're like, they're being very careful now, but then they're not being very careful.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a question, and I don't feel that they would answer this question on the show, but it's just a random question about zombies and the rules of the zombies. So if zombies need to feed on human flesh, that's what they're driven to do, can't they starve to death? And if they do starve to death, how does that biological process happen? I don't know if anybody's ever talked about this. I'm sure people have talked about it, but I don't know if it's ever been addressed in a film or a TV show. But it's something that I've been thinking about lately, and it's been kind of bothering me because, for instance, in the episode 2 of The Walking Dead, they go to that FEMA center to Shane and that new character.
Yeah.
They go to the trailer to get the medical supplies to
Yes.
save Carl after being shot. So the zombies are still there. They're still kind of milling about, and it seems like they're moving a bit slower. So they kind of go into this dormant state. My question is, do they stay in that dormant state indefinitely? It would be impossible, because if they're driven to eat human flesh to sustain themselves, wouldn't they die?
Right. Do they need to sustain themselves? That's basically the rules for whoever's working on the genre at that particular minute.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at, for example, the movie 28 Days Later, which again, we kind of agreed it's not a zombie film, but it's kind of like a virus thing. At the end of that movie, they kind of write it out because they can tell that after a certain amount of time, these infected people are going to die off. And that's kind of how the movie ends, is they basically ride them out.
Right.
Until they're all
Right.
so sickly dead that they can't move and they just die.
Mm-hmm.
But this is different, like they said on that interview before. The virus 28 Days Later thing is different than zombies.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different set of rules, which we don't know the rules yet. This is how they're dealing with it. I read a series of books. The main book was World War Z.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about how these zombies, they would like freeze in the ice. And then when the ice would melt, they would come to life again because they're just there waiting.
Mm-hmm.
They would fall into the bottom of the ocean, and they're there like in the bottom of the ocean trying to grab boats passing by, but they're still alive. Granted, if the elements tear them apart, whether it's, if you're in the ocean, fish or something tears them apart,
Right.
then they're useless. Same thing if they're in the outdoors. If the elements, animals or weather or whatever, they do something to them, then they're dead. But there doesn't seem to be much of a natural death to them other than, and they said it in the interview, they said you have to sever the brain
Right.
from the rest of the body. That's the only way to stop that connection, which is a little bit like the Romero
True.
rules.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is that, I keep saying human flesh, but obviously in the Walking Dead world, that's not true, because when they did perform that autopsy on the zombie, they found animal
Right.
remains inside.
Plus, they remember in the first episode, the horse.
The horse,
They
right.
attacked the horse and they
That's
killed
true.
the horse.
Mhm.
So they are into animals, but we have not seen zombie animals.
Right.
That's the only difference we've seen so far. So
Right.
we are getting the rules a little bit at a time, but I don't think we're going to find any shocking new twists on the zombie biology or the zombie rules. Again, the show really is not about the zombies. We talked about this before.
Yeah.
It's about people interacting with each other and
Sure.
how crazy they go and what they do, what they're willing to do to survive.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing where the rest of this season's going to go. Really curious as to whether or not Michael Rooker is going to come back, his character, because he's a great actor, but his character is, definitely very interesting. And now you have this whole dynamic with his brother.
Now, remember, his brother was a character that was created for the TV show. Apparently, the brother is not part of the comic.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a difference right there.
Yeah.
With the character, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. But I still think that, primarily the performances are still top-notch. I mean, especially Andrew Lincoln
Oh.
as Sheriff Grimes. He is just phenomenal.
He's looking for a sign, and he gets some sign. He thinks he's seeing something
sure
good,
does.
and then his son gets shot.
He sure does.
I also think, like you said before, we still don't know what the game plan is. In other words, first season was, well, let's get to Atlanta, and let's get to the CDC. So it gave everybody a mission of what they're trying to accomplish. I guess now we're in a mode where it's like, okay, well, let's go to Fort something. They were trying to get to another area. Hopefully that's protected or something. I guess that's the point of the show right now, is to find a safe haven.
Right.
I mean, I think they've gone beyond the cure, because I think whatever was whispered by the CDC guy at the end of season 1 into Rick, is something that they still keeping quiet about. And they teased it a little bit, I think, on the last episode, but they're still not telling us. What did he whisper to him? I assume he's already walking around saying there's no cure. That's it. We're done. But it's up to him, really, to keep the group moving, because that's the central character of the show, and that's how they structured it, is he's the moral compass of the group, and he's the one that keeps them going. If he gives up, show's over.
Yeah.
Plus, it was announced, I believe, a couple days ago when they aired the second episode that they renewed for third.
Yep, season 3.
We're already moving on to a third season, and things look really good so far. Well, that pretty much covered the first 2 episodes of The Walking Dead. I also had a chance in between these recordings to watch the third episode, which was an unusual strong episode. Not because the episodes are not normally strong episodes, but because at first viewing, this third episode, which is the continuation of the storyline of what's happening at the farm with Carl being shot and being helped back into recovery. But at first viewing, this episode seemed kind of like a slow episode. I don't want to call it a filler, but it was a character developing episode. It was kind of low on the action, except for the end, where they really had a very strong finish. But upon second viewing of this episode, it's really one of the strongest episodes I think that we've seen so far, because not only are you developing the characters, but one of the ongoing themes that they decided to pick this particular episode to explore is the theme of giving up. And that is, different characters go through their different stages of whether they want to fight or they want to stop fighting and just kind of give up on everything. One of our regular characters, Andrea, who on previous episodes dating back to the first season was at that stage where she just wanted to give up on everything, and Dale, the older character of the group, kind of like the grandfatherly type of character, he had prevented her from killing herself by taking away her gun. This is something that carried on to the second season, and they've addressed it and how upset she was about the fact that he kind of took away her right to be able to make that decision, that if she couldn't handle it anymore, she would end things on her own, and how upset she was at him, and she continues to be. Now, on this episode, she encounters with another one of the survivors that she's traveling with, a zombie that appears to be hanging from a tree. And it turns out that that was a person that apparently was bitten. So that person knew he was going to die, and that person hung himself unknowingly. Obviously, after you hang yourself, after you die, you return. So this is basically a hanging zombie now. You're dealing with a back from the dead creature that was apparently eaten from the waist down. It was just bare bones. And that kind of shocked her in a way, I think, back into reality a little bit. In other words, she didn't seem to be that eager anymore to kind of kill herself, because she was pretty shocked, I guess, and affected by what happened to this person who just wanted to give up on everything, who gave up, basically, and how it ended for this person. So that kind of brought her character back, I think, a little bit into the light, if you will. The other character is Rick's wife. They're at a point where they need to perform this operation on Carl, and they don't have the proper tools yet. Shane is out with Otis trying to get back with the respirator, and they haven't gotten back yet. And he talks to her about not giving up, and she brings up the idea of, maybe it's better this way. If Carl dies, then he doesn't have to suffer with everybody else, and what kind of life they're going to have, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And Carl at one point wakes up and talks about the deer that he saw on the previous episode and what a wonderful thing it was, and that kind of convinced her not to give up also, I believe. It strengthened Rick's point that they can't give up, that it doesn't matter how bad things are. They have to keep fighting. They have to keep looking for a place where things will be somewhat normal. So that kind of brings her out of her rut in a way. We also have the beginning of a relationship, I think, between the new character, Maggie, and our other regular character there, that is going to start blossoming into future episodes. So that wasn't any life-altering kind of, devastating B-story to the episode. However, the big story on this episode is Otis and Shane. They go out, as we saw in the previous episode, to try to find a respirator and some medical supplies. And on their way back, they get trapped in high school where they're being chased around by zombies, and they have to escape in 2 different ways. And Otis is kind of like a heavy person who can't run that fast, but he's doing the best that he can, and he's catching up, and he's getting here or there. At one point, they split up, and Shane gets injured. He falls, he jumps out of the building, like a 1 or 2 story kind of section of a building, and he hurts his ankle. So he's limping through. He's carrying very heavy equipment on his back, trying to fight with the zombies at the same time. And he gets to a situation where he thinks he's done. He gets kind of cornered. And as he's there, fighting with his last breath, Otis comes and helps him and rescues him and brings him to a clearing so they can continue running. Now, keep in mind, this episode opened up with Shane in a bathroom shaving his hair. He's shaving all his, shaving his head. And as the episode progresses, it tells us, what is that all about? What are we looking at? He's looking in a mirror. He's looking kind of weird. So as they continue to escape and run away, they start again to fall behind. The zombies are catching up on them. And there's a point where Shane even tells Otis that, here, take the equipment and you go, keep going. I can't go anymore. And Otis, once again, lifts him up, gets him up and walking again and running, kind of prodding along. But they get to a point where, again, the zombies are catching up to them, and Shane at that point decides, which is a very unusual scene in terms of he wanted to make sure that Otis only had 1 bullet left and said, let me know when you're down to 1 bullet. And Otis is down to 1 bullet. So Shane turns around and shoots Otis in the knee. And Otis goes down. And as Shane is taking his backpack away so he can carry everything else, Otis hits him and they start fighting and they start struggling. And Shane gets injured a little bit from Otis. But then he's eventually able to free himself from Otis as the swarm of zombies come and destroy, rip Otis apart and eat him. And Shane gets away with all the medical supplies. So he it would appear that he purposely injured Otis so that the zombies will go after him and leave Shane alone, which is very unusual, very cold, shocking ending to this episode. And that then explains to where we're at now in the beginning of the episode, where he gets back to the farm and he starts to tell people, about how they got split up and then he kind of lost him and they got him. He obviously omitting everything having to do how he shot him in the knee. In the bathroom, he realizes, he's looking in the mirror and he realizes he's part of his scalp. His hair is missing. He's got bruises and scratches everywhere. So that makes sense now why he's shaving his head. He's basically covering the wounds that Otis gave him, because if it's anybody else that would have scratched him, if it was a zombie or something, he would be infected. But the only way he can explain chunks of hair missing is for him to shave his entire head. And that's where we leave this episode. Shane is a completely, I don't want to say new character, but he's evolving in a very dark manner. Up to this point, his big dark secret was the fact that he had a relationship with Rick's wife, while everybody thought Rick was in a coma that was not going to come out of it. He was practically dead. And that guilt has been going on through all these episodes to the point where he wants to just leave. A couple of episodes ago, he just wants to pack up and leave and get away from them because he can't stand living with them. His best friend, his high school chum, and the woman that he started having a relationship, and now he had to cut everything off. And now we're at a point where not only is he tortured because of his relationship disaster that he has on his hands, but now he had to kill somebody who was helping him. This wasn't somebody who was trying to hurt him. Otis saved him practically twice, while they're in the high school, and then he turns around and shoots him. It's unbelievable how these characters are changing, and obviously Shane is, for now, seems to be changing for the worse. So that's how we wrap up episode 3 of season 2 of The Walking Dead, and I would like to thank everybody for joining us. We will continue with a little more of New York Comic Con coverage on future episodes. Next week we'll have a regular episode. So until then, on behalf of Mike, Steve, and myself, thank you for listening to Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
We're all rattled. No one's thinking clearly, but we have to start. Our lives depend on it. To hell with the noise. guess I'm losing hope. But like I said, it's all about slim chances now. And a slim chance is better than none.
Stop.